In the past year or so, I've been hearing more conversations about multi-generational impact of trauma and the impact on adult children. I've been aware of these impacts for a longer period, having two children and two stepchildren of my own, all of who are now adults. These conversations aren't loud yet. They are quieter rumblings, often among those who are living the experience of multi-generational impact, and most are adult children. We are so incredibly grateful that Guy Dallaire is raising his voice and others to be heard about their experiences. This is an area of impact that we need to address, and I believe this presentation today will be an important catalyst of bringing this issue to the table. We are pleased that Guy will present in his first language of French, and as this is a session you don't want to miss, if you require interpretation into English or any other language, we encourage you to take a moment to click on the interpretation circle at the bottom of your screen as mentioned before. Choose a language of your choice, and you'll hear the presentation in real time in the language you selected. We will also put a link into the chat that you can download an English version of the PowerPoint to follow along, and an English recording of the presentation will be available after the summit. If you need any assistance, please click on the orange tech button on the lower left hand of the screen, and we'll be happy to ensure you have everything you need. Guy's presentation is very open, honest, and direct. We wouldn't want it any other way. His presentation includes a short video of news coverage that has images that might be difficult for some to watch. We invite you to participate however is best for you during that 2-minute portion. You can turn off your screen, you can step away, or you can observe in a conscious way. We're excited to welcome Guy Dallaire to the summit. He is a veteran and multi-generational military family member. Guy?
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. I will now go from English to French, and I'll try to speak not too fast.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks to the Atlas Institute. I'm going now to speak in French, and I would like to present my work on the PTSD, about raising the awareness on intergenerational trauma with the military and first responder communities. Thank you very much for hosting my presentation. Thanks to both organizations for enabling me to talk about my experience and my research. It's a very important topic I would like to address this morning with you. Today, I would like to tell you something about my history, my journey, my experience, and to give you the context of this topic and tell you why I'm here today. Then, I would like to tell you what is the vicariant trauma. What about the vicariant trauma? And I will tell you something, the outcome of my results. My history over time. You have the timeline of my history, my life experience. I was born in 1985 in a military family. My father was military. Both grandfathers, two grandfathers served in the Second World War. One of them in the Netherlands. One brother, one elder sister. My mother was a daughter of a military. So it's a family which is much involved in the military environment. We have moved a lot because of our history. When I was 12 years old, it was my sixth home. We know that's the routine, the daily life of military families. Since 1994, we used to have a classical military life. Everything was fine at that time. My today's presentation is dedicated to vets and to the vets family and family of the first responder communities. It's about raising the awareness on intergenerational trauma with the military and first responder communities. 1994, my father came back from a mission in Rwanda following the conflict in Rwanda, and it was the beginning of a major change in my life and in the life of my family. Came back to this mission from Rwanda. He was tired, and we had the feeling that everything was business as usual. But in the fact, we could not realize that he had been affected. He had been moved by what was going on in Rwanda, what he had been going through in Rwanda during his service. In 2000, we realized that something was going wrong with my father. He was a general, 3 stars general, that he had to go through some mental health care support. So I had the opportunity to know a bit more regarding the extent of his mental health condition. It was not the same as 1994. In 2003, one book was released. A book about family history and his mission when he was abroad, serving for the army. And the first time he was using the word of injury, post-trauma injury, that we can call PTSD. While watching this gentleman on TV and by reading the first pages of his books, I learned so much about my family history and what about my family had been through. And I even realized new things, new topics regarding my family and my grandparents, what they have been through during those conflicts. From now on, I started to change and I started to better understand it. Helped me to understand why the relation with my father had to change. I'm not here to tell you some personal things about my life, but I really experienced some major change in terms of my relationship with my family and with my father. It was not anymore business as usual, but when the book was released, I really understood. It really helped me to understand what was going on. It was a major shock for me to understand that my father was going through some very difficult time. Indeed, it was not easy to talk about it. So reading this book was a great experience for me. 2005, we are a family which is very keen, very keen in serving in the army. So I joined the army in 2005. Then it was a normal military service for me. I was deployed locally, domestically, and in the continent. I never moved abroad. However, during those years, I was involved in several relationships with the wife, with the lady who's now my wife, and some symptoms started to appear, especially in 2003. And following 2003, new symptoms appeared, like anxiety, nervous breakdowns. We say the word triggered in English. So something was triggered. I was suffering from depression. And when we were talking about the army in the radio, on the TV, and when I was socializing with people, when we were talking about the veterans and the army, when people were telling me were asking me about my father, I had this feeling of depression and of nervous breakdown. And especially when alcohol and booze was involved, I was really feeling bad. Sometimes my wife had to step in and really to take care of me because I was involved in heavy drinking. And I realized that I needed to get isolated from the rest of people. Sometimes my wife had to take care of me because I was completely destroyed, and I couldn't even cope with these socializing stuffs. Sometimes I needed to leave some events. 2012, while I was driving a car, I was really moved by one of my friends' comment. I was driving on the highway. I had to stop the car. I had to get out of the car. So I had to leave the car. I was driving, and I had to get out of the car and to start to let off steam. I really had to let off steam. I understood that it was not a normal behavior, and that's why I was told to for support, for mental health support. It had already happened at home, and while I was on my own, I knew that it was not easy for my environment, and that's why I decided to ask for mental support, for health support. The next day, I just had to visit to my supervisor. And by the way, I would like to pay tribute to my supervisor at the time because he was a great help for me. I asked him that I needed some mental health support. He was very receptive. The next day, I asked for mental support. I had the opportunity to see one shrink, a psychotherapist. Then 2014 I got married. 2016 I moved to the regular forces. It was a new kickoff of my career. I signed my transfer. I took my high school degree. We purchased a house. Everything was running all right. I was focusing on my career because it was the way I had been educated. Well, sorry for my French, but at my father's times, and even though now. No need to translate. So family has always been, family has always come second. First was the mission and the career and service for the Canadian forces. Then 2017, I became a father. Things have changed. I became a father. My wife was realizing, and since 2018, I needed to get some training. I had to move to Gagetown. And what happened at that time was in the armed forces, I was asked to move for a period of time. And before leaving, I wanted to take some days off with my family, to spend some time with the family. I had to sort out some administrative issues before leaving. And Thursday, before leaving on holidays, I was asked to attend another training. And I was handed over my documents. I was asked to pack my things and to move. It was not the first time it happened to me. It has happened to me before. It was not a big deal, but this time something was broken. And I realized by becoming a father, my values had changed completely.
Other two capros like me who were nice, who supported me in the past, and I was polite and I told them thank you. And why does Africa and the IMP comes to fetch me? I was triggered, and as I said before, I had no issues. Wherever I get a job, I'm always happy to go. But I didn't realize how much I realized that I didn't realize how much I was affected. And a few days later, I was talking to my uncle, and and we were crying all together because I was the day after I received an email. And they told me if I was able to use weapons or use arms. When you're in infantry school, you learn to do so. And I went back to working into my team. And I was kind of in disgrace when you go to the warrant officer's office and they ask you questions. They asked me to go back to therapy because I stopped for a while and I thought that I was fine, but I had to go back to therapy. And I went back to the therapy, and in 2020, my office, during the pandemic, I kept on going to therapy, and what our office was doing was very public. I went back home in 2020, and I'm very grateful professionally. I'm very grateful to my profession. I know that, and since then, I kept thinking about going to therapy with Will It Works Canada. It is a group therapy. It is a couple therapy. I went through couple therapy, group therapy. And there is a gentleman, Chris Nanford, who recommended to me, recommended to share my experience because I was very ashamed to speak about my experience. As I said, I wasn't deployed. I didn't jump onto a mine. I didn't have an experience with IEDs. I didn't go through big cities, streets. I wasn't in a really war. I was telling myself I had nothing to do in that. I didn't. I wasn't understanding what I was doing in this group therapy with other people who were deployed and who suffered, and with people who really seemed injured. And he said, "No, don't. You have a lot to share." This gentleman, Chris, told me you have a lot. So I started to delve deeper and try to understand what I understood over time, to review my career, and I started my research about that in order to and I'm in a way to publish a book. And sometimes my head before was I have to cover my mission. My mission was to cover Canada first of all, but now my best thing for me is the welfare of my family, my welfare. My objective now is to give tools to people to feel good and to as I will say later on, sorry if I use some English here, but sometimes I mix French with English, and I cannot find the right word always. So in a nutshell, that's my experience. And in the meantime, I have to tell you some element. What is the next topic? What is the vicarian? What is the vicarian trauma? So the vicarian comes from the vicarious. So that means a change, a shift within someone. And however, it is a shift or change that comes from outside. It is something that is that the person lived. When you look at someone else. Sorry, I'm late in my PowerPoint, but it is something that have been lived. It is not, the vicarian word wasn't really well known. I've known it. I went through Google and I've discovered this word. And my dad also made the research. I wanted to be informed and educate myself about this topic, but I've never heard the word vicarian trauma or vicarian. It was a niche. It was a word niche, which is specific to the mental health professionals, psychologists, the therapists who use this vicarian, the word mainly vicarian with the word trauma, because they constantly facing on a daily basis, facing this vicarian, they're facing trauma, they are seeing veterans, they are in front of first responders who went through trauma, whatever they were facing that issue. So those people were facing this vicarian trauma, and over time they developed post-traumatic trauma, so vicarian comes from here. They comes from there. And it remained, however, used mainly among professionals. Through my research and my experience, I learned that it is a term that we increasingly hear currently. It is multidimensional, multi-generational word. It has been we hear it more than before due to the experience lived by the indigenous populations, because indigenous population had been abducted. They have suffered from a trauma, and those trauma have been given, have been inherited by the children, by the other, and even the social issue had been inherited by the children of those indigenous populations and First Nation population. That's what this is, vicarian trauma, and that's a matter of interest to me. It is not only about to live with the parents who have been injured. It's about how they live on a daily basis, but also how they work, how the militaries and how the first responders and militaries live. And because what you have to keep in mind that that job is quite well known today. Sorry. I think I put my video on, sorry. What you are seeing here It goes back to the long time. The media are present on the ground with the news, with the channels. They broadcast on live real information. On my grandparents' time, it wasn't the same. Everything was recorded in the past, and then the information were recorded. Some parts were taken out, and what we present to the public, what we wanted to present after well thought study. But now, due to this fight in order to go as faster than other channels, now the information is served as a food on a daily basis. So even watching the TV, watching the news is carrying trauma. I was on the ground myself, and I was seeing that. And when I remember when I was a child, I remember that I used to watch some programs, some really traumatic programs. And when we went to school, the other pupils used to ask her the question, "Have you seen that?" And that's something that is quite difficult as a child to just be fed with such information. And I think with what is great about today's families is that we have this open conversation with open communication. However, the social media amplify the news right now in order to inform us about what is happening somewhere in the world. But we have also other people, what other people think and do. Sometimes you hear some comment that can be very that can hurt, because when someone who lost a friend or family member and hearing that comment or reading that comment, it's very difficult. What about a family who, after their parents is deployed and goes back home, you go through a lot of difficulties because you watch the TV, you listen and you watch the internet, and the families are living that like a trauma. What happens when the parents come back from deployment? It's not easy. It's not easy to discuss all what happened over there. Sometimes we are asked asked question, and mainly when people are injured, people want to understand. And as this person has symptoms, the behavior change, and people are asking to talk about it. It's very difficult. Sometimes I was walking around with my father, and I was doing my best. My father was. It was very difficult for me, and sometimes when I was walking with my dad, when we go to a cinema, I always wished not to have a part that is too violent or sensitive, and I don't want to see anything that is pertaining to veterans. What happens when the father comes back or the parents comes back? As part of my research, what I discovered is that most of the cases, the child ignores or do not know the injury of the parent, or is incapable to explain why the injury took place. And sometimes these parents he doesn't even know about his or her own injury. They do not realize how they were injured, how much they changed. They do not realize what are the effects of those symptoms on the family, on the children. On my case, the child, it's when I was talking about the media, the child, when they watch the news and through the media, they do not know how their parents were affected. They just have an idea, they think, and the family and the children are facing the symptoms because they are living with the parents. A young child, you cannot say. You cannot tell the child, I don't want to talk about it. You have to kind of my father was a veteran. He was a military, and he used to leave and came back. And every time he went and came back, I noticed that he changed. Even he was not injured, but he changed behaviorally. Changed, and those changes were maybe for us he did. Maybe he changed in his way of acting with us. And every time the change was different. What happens with the child when you have a children? The children adapt. They're more resilient than we think. They adapt easily. They adapt to the situations. They do what we are asking them to do in two manners. The first one is that that's what I learned from research. That two things happen with the children, and that I noticed. First of all, the child will go to the gray. He becomes the gray man. He tries not to create do not create any waves. He doesn't want to create any change. The child wants to ensure that everything is correct, that everything is working fine within the house, and the child won't like to. The child doesn't want to create any change, any shift. He will be very sensitive. He will be the great man, try to have the best grades at school, try not to be a troublemaker at school, try not to be a troublemaker for the mother, to perform to his or her utmost, and try to be the gray man of the house. The second is the parentification. So here in the second situation, the parent being injured, the child is becoming the parents. They take care of the house. They take care in order to help the family. So this child is going to take this role of the father or the mother that is more important, too important for the child, too important for a child, and so the child will bear the brunt, and due to the injury suffered by the father. So they go to the father or the mother and go, would you like to eat? Would you like me to prepare the food? And even if, the parents sometimes do not even realize that the child is acting like an adult and trying to do their best. Which is very complex, because when a parent is coming back without a leg, for example, which is terrible, but the child look at it, but sometimes the child will go to grocery shop and will check that nothing can bother the father or the mother without leg, and the parents do not even notice that, but the child will pay attention to that. So as you can see, that the child will take all these habits, and the child becomes will act like a parent, okay, responsible of the family, and that's how it works. So what it's like the child will develop attitudes or behaviors. Sometimes those habits can be transmitted. These habits can be transmitted from these children to their own children. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes even when they grow up, they cannot understand. Those children cannot grow up what that triggers some of their behavior, what they trigger some of their overprotection over their families, and this is due to this veterans or this trauma that they suffered when they were children. So what is the result of my research and some tips? And really, like, humbly, it is something simple. And my research was based on vicariant trauma from a child or from a former veteran suffering from the PSD, and also the child of a former veteran. I am, and sometimes, today I learn more, but my father is a help, and he has been injured, and now I haven't been to a war, but I know that a lot of things are happening but I know that my personal life is affected, and the army released me due to my personal life, due to the trauma, to the depression, due to the past, to my childhood. So, how did I do my research? I did my research with a security interview with a score of candidates. Those candidates, the interviews were headed by a social worker in order to ensure that it is safely made for everyone. And all those results, I'm going to summarize them, and it will be published in a book soon. Here are some elements that are highlighted, or the big highlights of this study. So the first thing is that I'm talking about the children of today. In the past, yesterday I was speaking in English, and today I'm speaking in French. And why am I doing so? It's because to say that when the environment, the background change, everything changes. And today we have experiences. Now we have candidates who have this trauma, who take medicine, who are suicidal, who are under depression, who live with PTSD. I met who are under drugs, and I am myself an example. It is only less than 2 years that I have a better control of my alcohol consumption. I had also some issues in 2012 when I was going to Ottawa. I wasn't really sure if I was going to commit a suicide or going to Gatineau. And sometimes I didn't even know where I was going. I don't want to frighten anyone, but I would like you to understand that the effect can exist, but we have to learn how to manage them. So the first thing that is very important is, first of all, if you are here today, it's a good sign. It's a great sign. And one thing that helps you is the presence of parents. I'm talking about please be present in the life of your children. When you are adult, you go to work, you have a lot of things to do. But you are here. When you are at home, be at home. Be with your children. Be with your family. I know it's not easy to dissociate both, but it is already a first objective that you have to reach. The second thing, which is quite important, is that the service accessibility, or access to services. It's easier to have access to services. There are various programs in the various resources, military centers. You have a healthcare system for the veterans, for the militaries, for the soldiers that are available anytime. For the GRC, for veterans, you have services. And even for the first responders, you have also the union that have programs for you and your families. Take the time to seek assistance, to seek support. No one is expert. It is having an external point of view can help, and that's a service. The services are available. Seize the opportunity and use them. And secondly, act. It's not only about words, act. Transform the words into actions. So the first step in using force is the presence. Be present. Be present and be alert. Be present with your family, with your children, to tell them, I am here. Maybe I am a different person, a little bit I have this or that. I'm talking about whenever someone has an injury, was injured, speak about it. As I said a few minutes ago, if you have had a physical injury, it is visible. For the others, it's easier to see that. But when you have a mental issue, people do not see it. When you have a PTSD, people don't see it. So speak, express yourself, put yourself at the place of the people surrounding you and try to understand their behavior. I mean, because if you put yourself on their shoes, you may understand your role. Your role, if you need assistance, please go and fetch it. It is easier said than done. For me, it was the ultimatum of my wife in 2012, who said, "You need to seek help. Take the time, go and make a checkout, go to the doctor. It takes only a little bit of your time, but it's worth it." And then try to stop the parentification. The father or the mother has to take their role back, and the child has to go back to his or her own role, which is to be a child. It's easy to say than said, but a lot of children need to go back. They do not have to bear the brunt of their parents. They need to have to take the time as parents to take them to school, to take care of them, to make them feel safe and secured. Communication goes both ways. So speak to your child, speak to your spouse, speak to your partner. You need to coach your child, try to understand and sit together with your partner, with your child, and tell them, if you are able to do it, tell them that you know your condition, you know that you have an injury. Tell them that you go to therapy, that you take pills, that yes, my work is different, my program is different. Yes, maybe sometimes I have difficulties to speak. Sometimes we have to go earlier. But it is important to you don't have to delve deeper in the details of the event that happens. No, but give them just the outlook. The child shouldn't be traumatized, but explain to them in a nutshell. Be honest and frank with them, and listen to what they have to say. Respond to their questions, to their concerns. And if you are not able to do it, go to the therapist, go to a specialist and experts in order to have a healthy exchange, in order to have an easier conversation with your children. After that, and if I'm not mistaken, I will end here. It is a small formula. It is which is the trauma formula. This trauma formula helped me to understand the various things. And it helps to set up a knowledge around the trauma and vicariant trauma. And it is quite a simple section. It's not the end of the trauma knowledge, it's the beginning. It is a step that helps you to go up. So the trauma formula is the exposition to an event or emotional digestion process interrupted. It means that it is how we react to the past. It's not always easy. It's not, with work, we do not have the time to stop and think it over. But I do think that it is, if you want a negative social response, the example is the blue helmet who were in Bosnia-Herzegovina, who went through very difficult situations. They did their job. They worked hard, and they worked in the difficulties. They didn't take the time to sit and think about what was going on. When they go back to home, as soon as they land, they go back home, and when the night comes, they start to think. They overthink because the army tried to hide what was happening in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It was another era, okay, and we didn't appreciate that time as it is. but they had this has a social impact, because the civil society didn't know what was happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the family didn't know. And whenever whenever this military is back home, hear the bad comment, that they're affected. And it's the same. We have to use the same formula for the children. Children are suffering the vicariant trauma, and we need to help them. We need to go through the symptoms. The children will not speak to their friends. They cannot speak to their injured parents because they know they cannot do it. They do not want to create waves. And sometimes the children try to speak with someone, but they have the feeling that they are not understood. And sometimes people make some bad comments. And sometimes the children watch programs that highlight the work of their father or their mother. And the children will keep deep inside these feelings, and they will develop symptoms over time, and that becomes a trauma. And if you read my book, you will see some results of the interview. I know I went through more than 40 minutes. I went over the time that has been allocated to me, and now I would like to give you the floor for any questions if you have to.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, I think we have time for one or two questions. First, I want to thank everyone for your patience as we're getting a lot of technical stuff out of the way. This is our first virtual family summit. It's been a huge undertaking, so thank you so much for your patience, and I hope that you were able to follow along one way or another as we were trying to answer all of your questions in the chat and technical things as we went. Guy, thank you so much for the honesty in your experience. I can't imagine what it would have been like as you were talking about, having things come into your home about what your father experienced at the same time while you were trying to process and understand your experiences. And loved what you said about being present. I think so often we assume that that kids will be okay, that they're resilient. We're not going to talk to them about it because, we want to keep, we don't want to make them worry. But I think we often don't acknowledge how intuitive children are, how much they pick up that things are wrong, and we don't acknowledge that piece of it. So I will go to the Q&A. People thanking you for what you've done. I see that there was a recommendation for an addiction program. I'm not going to put you on the spot right now to recommend that. We did have a different question submitted. We'll try and get some resources for addiction resources. I just don't want to put you on the spot in the moment to singling one out. But one other question that was submitted was, how do you recognize and describe intergenerational trauma without making the veteran feel as though it's their fault? So I love that you've encouraged veterans to come forward and talk to the children about their experiences. But if the veteran's kind of not quite prepared or ready, and maybe it's the co-parent, how can they bring these issues forward? And as it says, recognize and describe that without making the veteran feel as though it's their fault.
That's a good question. That's yeah, kind of something maybe my my dad would have been more equipped to answer, because but as a father myself, I've often wondered how I'll talk to this to my son one day, and there is an element of risk. It's not something that's easy, and of course the injured person has to protect themselves in a sense that if they don't feel like they can or should do it, then I'm not saying do it at all costs. What I'm saying is that it's something that should be seriously considered, to be open and to talk about this openly and share in a manner that is safe for that injured person. And if you need if you need to get some help in doing it, I've talked to it with your therapist if you have one, and how you can go about doing this, and then they should help you with this, or go get an outside resource with a social worker, to go to your local MFRC or to your wherever you be referred to for this kind of help, mental health, and bring the child in and go at it that way to get the ball rolling of sharing what's happened, so that the child who's being exposed to the symptoms can understand more and process these emotions that he's having through this, so that it doesn't hopefully doesn't turn into a vicarious trauma. But it's not easy. I recognize that. I'm yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of courage. I've not served in uniform, but I've spoken to my husband who, as I mentioned, has a traumatic stress injury. And sometimes he has said that deploying overseas took less courage than it did for him to step forward and ask for help and to talk to his family about it. I think I'm going to ask you one more question quickly. There was acknowledgement in the chat that sometimes it's difficult to access services in your own language. So I'm going to ask the question in English. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to answer in English or French. We appreciate that you chose to present today in your mother tongue. The question is, as your father worked his way through his understanding and treatment, did it help you deal with yours?
When my father was going under treatment, he was going to in the 90s during his career. He was getting treatment at a VA hospital in Vermont. It was a partnership that Canada and the US has. So he was going about once a month down there. Often with my mom, they would drive down there. And I remember going once or twice with them because I was too young to stay at home alone. And all I understood from that, I was having a weekend down a bit of a road trip with my parents, and I didn't understand really why or how or what was going on. So I'd have to say no, it didn't. As my father was getting treatment, he's still getting treatment today. He's just learned to live a lot better with it, fortunately. But no, him getting treatment did not help me. And my parents tried at one point. I think they noticed something was going wrong. And I remember when I was in high school, they brought me to a therapist downtown, and I just remember looking at the therapist like, "Who the hell are you to try to understand what I'm living? What my what my family's been going." It was not a good experience. So yeah, it did not help me, him getting therapy. It helped him because he's still there today, and I'm thankful for that. But yeah, not sure if that answers the question, but
For sure it does. I can't believe how quickly our time with you went. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I hope folks will check out, I think we're going to be providing a recording of you delivering in English as well as the PowerPoint. So I hope folks will check that out. So I see that our MC Huff has rejoined us again.
So Guy, I just want to say thank you so much for your compelling presentation. A lot of stuff resonated with me, especially when you said you came to a realization that your relationship with your dad had changed. I mean, how could it not? And specifically, it was no longer business as usual. With these mental health injuries, it is no longer business as usual. And I really loved some of the tools that you mentioned. Be present in the family, know about the resources, but more importantly, take action and search those resources out. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Merci, monsieur.
merci.
Polly, I know you're the mother of two adult children, what were your thoughts?
I think a few of my takeaways were number one, even in his own journey, he said it was his wife that really pushed him to get help. And many family members, we are the first ones that sort of observe the changes. And so, I really liked his message of sort of keeping that communication open. I think, communication is key. I've learned that. I mean, I didn't learn it overnight. It's been a journey. Um, Getting professional help, reach out when you can. And, him being honest right at the end there, saying, when he was a teenager and his parents took him and he wanted nothing to do with it. I've experienced that as well. And so it's really about perseverance and trying to keep that line of communication. And sometimes the support is from afar, but still supporting as best as possible. And the other really great takeaway was, like he said, Huff mentioned, is being present and educating your children on your illness and not being afraid, doing it age appropriately. And we're going to hear from some presenters tomorrow about impact on children and some tips and tools. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I can't thank Guy enough for what he's given us today and what he's put the spotlight on adult children, because it is a part of our community that needs much resource and research moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you. You and I are going to duck out, hand it back over to Huff to introduce our next speaker.